Hello, anyone that's watching. Hello, Bethel students, and welcome to this fourth week in a row of the block online. So it's been over a month since we've been able to meet together at the block, and I don't know about you guys, but I am definitely missing Wednesday nights hanging out with you. Yes, that was good. Let's start over. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the fourth week in a row of the block online. It's been over a month since we've been able to meet together at the block, and I don't know about you guys, but I'm definitely missing that time with you. I don't think it's any coincidence that we are going through this series right now on what it means to be the church. We're calling it Born Again to be Lit, and we're saying that the church is loving, inviting, and together. And like I said, I don't think it's any coincidence that we're going through this right now in this time where it's hard to be together, because I think we really can see the negative effects of not being together as part of the church during this last month where we've had to be social distancing. So like I said, tonight we're going to be going through, continuing that series, Born Again to be Lit, talking about how the church should be lit or loving, inviting, and together. Tonight we're going to be talking about that L again, and this time it's about loving people. Our kickoff question is, what makes a good church? I want you guys to be thinking about tonight, what makes a good church? What makes somewhere, what makes something, how should I decide where to go to church? Maybe would be another way to put that. And the big question that goes with that and ties along with that is, how does Jesus want his people to relate to each other? If we know the answer to that question, we'll know what makes a good church. But before we go into that, we're going to check out this testimony video from one of your leaders, Stephanie. And in it, you're going to see from firsthand experience what makes a good church. And so I want you guys to see if you can tell from her testimony here what makes a good church.
Hey guys, happy Wednesday. I really do miss hanging out with you guys at the block and being able to see you every week face to face, but I'm so glad that we have Zoom and ways that we can connect with each other even though we can't see each other physically right now. So Pastor Dan asked me just to share a little bit about me and my little bit about what church has meant to me, and really just how Jesus has been a huge part of my life. So my journey actually started, I went to church when I was little, here and there, but it wasn't until my sophomore year in high school. I was pretty lonely. I was kind of just lost. I felt kind of like I was doing things. I was really busy. I was involved in a lot of things, but I just felt like something was missing. And my brother actually was invited to go to a thing at a youth group, and my mom made me go with her to pick him up. And I didn't really want to go, but I'm like, fine, I'll go. And I was in the car. And when we got there to the church to pick him up, this girl came running over and she's like, hey, my name is Renee. And she's like, I'd love for you to come to youth group next week. Here's all the kids that go to your school that are at our youth group. I would love for you to come. And she's like, come on Wednesday. So obviously it was what I needed to hear, because I had never been invited to something like that before. And she was so kind and so friendly. And she took time to write down names of kids that went to my school. And I went to a pretty big high school, but I did know some of those names. So I finally made the point. I said, Mom, could I please go try that out on that Wednesday? And so I'm so very thankful that Renee came up to that window of the car that day and told me about it, because I started my journey of coming on Wednesday nights also, but this was at my church in Oregon where I grew up. And it was cool because that relationship started growing, and I started realizing that they were talking about something that I had never understood before. I believed in God, and I knew that he existed, that he created the world. I went to Sunday school some when I was a little kid, but I didn't really understand. So a little more time went on, and I started developing relationships with the other students, and I got to know the youth pastor, which we called PK, which is like Pastor Dan is to us, but it's like PK was the one that was in charge of our youth group, and just over time, I really started learning more and more about God. And I kept hearing people talking about being saved. And so I finally, one day, I asked one of my friends, Tracy, one of the girls that went to youth group with, and I said, hey, what does that word saved mean? And so she and her mom sat down and opened up the Bible and started talking to me about how Jesus loved me and how he died for my sins, and that I was a sinner, but that he loved me enough that he died for me. And I just had never heard that relationship of love before, even though I knew about Jesus, but I didn't really know what he had done for me. So that day changed my life forever, because I decided to take that step of faith and accept Jesus as my Savior and the one that's going to rule my life. And so fast forward a little time, I continued to go to youth group and grow in my relationship, but I actually went to a college, a Bible college, and so I was surrounded by so many different things about the Bible and about Jesus and growing my relationship. And my favorite times in the morning is always when I pick up my Bible and be able to read a Bible verse or a devotional or something like that, because it's really part of that growth. But one of the things that has really changed and fed me in my relationship is my time at church, because I talked about youth group, and for me and for you guys, church for you, a lot of it is youth group, right? Is that's what we know. We go on Wednesday nights, we go to the block and we hang out there and we learn about Jesus. But then I knew that there was more that needed to happen. So I decided to start going to church on Sunday mornings also. And so it was huge, because I got to meet a bunch of other people that believed in Jesus. I had more support and love from people that went to our church, and got to experience just all that there is about what church is all about. I love to sing, so I got to sing sometimes at church, and I started being able to serve there and be able to participate in the community that the church has. And so not only was I having time in my personal time growing in Jesus, I was able to go to youth group and learn from PK and the other leaders and stuff. And then I also was able to go to church on Sundays and be able to get to meet the people there and learn about how Jesus could be part of my life, and have the examples of church and examples of people that love Jesus every day. And so I was able to do that. And then fast forward, as I said, I went to a Bible college, and so I learned how to how about church and how important it was. I went to church there and began serving, and it was just really cool, because as I grew, I had the church there that kind of grew along with me. And so they were there, the church is there for me to learn and to grow, but then also have a way to have others come with me and enjoy that with me. And so I've been able to serve on what we call worship team and be able to sing. And I do that here now at Bethel. And I did that at church in Pennsylvania and in Michigan too, where we lived at one point. But the biggest part is the relationships of the people that I've been able to meet at church has been a big part of my growth, because there's somebody there that loves me and cares for me and is walking alongside me in my faith journey. So I hope that really encourages you, because it's church is a lot of fun, but it's also a great place to learn and grow and know more about Jesus. So I do hope that this is something that you want for you too, because I know that any of us would love to be able to pick you guys up if you need a ride and bring you to church, because believe me, it's so worth it to have a church family even beyond Wednesday night, because that's even more opportunity to grow and learn more about Christ. Thanks so much for listening.
And so as you saw in Stephanie's testimony, just like she said, some of the biggest things that brought her to a relationship with Jesus were the love that she experienced in youth group and in church. And so from that testimony and from others as well, we can tell that love is such an important thing when it comes to church. But don't take our word for it. Let's look at what the Bible says, and let's look at 1 John 4:20 20 and 21. So take a minute, grab a Bible if you have one, flip to it on your phone if you want to do that. We're going to look at 1 John chapter 4, 20 and 21. So it starts off here, as you're turning to that, with a test. A few weeks ago, we talked about how to love God. We talked about what it means to love God. But here, in 1 John chapter 4, we have a test. Something that shows us that is a test to see if we love God. So here's what verse 20 says. If someone says, I love God, but hates a fellow believer, that person is a liar. So this is a test, similar to any kind of test, similar to maybe a test that you would take to see if you are sick. The test that you take to see if you love God is do you love people? Do you love a fellow believer, your fellow believers in Jesus? That is the test to see if we love God. So why is the test for loving God loving people? He goes on to give us some more information here in the second part of verse 20. He says, for if we don't love people we can see, how can we love God who we cannot see? So we can't see God, but we can see the people that God made. And we can see the people that God has given his image. As people, and especially as fellow believers, as this verse is talking about, other Christians, we bear the image of God. And so in all of us, there's this image of God. And so how we treat people strongly reflects what we believe about God. And so we get to verse 21, and he gives us this command, this instruction. Verse 21 says this, and he has given us this command. Those who love God must also love their fellow believers. And so you may be wondering, who is giving this command? Well, we have to think about who is writing this verse of Scripture. This is the book of 1 John. And John, the disciple of Jesus, is the one who wrote the letter of 1 John. And so that he here, who has given us this command, the us is John and the other disciples, that he is Jesus. And so John here is thinking of a specific time that Jesus gave a commandment about loving God and loving people. We see that specific commandment in Matthew chapter 22, where Jesus was replying to someone who asked him what was the most important thing, what was the most important law of God in God's law. And Jesus replied, love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. So here we see Jesus himself giving essentially the same command that John has given. Because John didn't make it up, John got it from Jesus. Jesus says the most important thing is to love God, and the second thing is like that, is similar to that, is connected to that, and it's loving your neighbor. Loving your neighbor as yourself. So a couple of things we get out of this, from this, that we could take away is that first, we need to see that this is not an optional thing. Loving people is not an optional adding on to a relationship with God. Loving people is essential. John says, those who love God must also love their fellow believers. It's not an option, it's a must. It's a must. It's proof. Loving other believers, loving people is proof that you love God. Without it, you don't have that. So that's number one. Number two, the second thing that we should see is that these two things, loving God and loving people, aren't the same. Although they are related to one another, they aren't the exact same thing. And so we can't just say if we love God, we automatically love people. And we can't say that if we love people that we're automatically loving God. These are two different things. To love God is to know him, to love him in his word, to have a relationship with him, to pray, to be taking in what the word says about him, to be believing what it says about Him. That's to love God. To love people is to take that love of God and extend it to others, to show others grace, to have forgiveness for other people, to love other people and show them and point them to the truth of God. So these things, loving God and loving people, aren't the same. Sometimes we are tempted to just make them, morph them into the same thing when they're two different things. They're both important and essential, but they're two different things. A way that might be helpful to think about it is this. Think of loving God like the engine of a car. So think of loving God like the engine of the car, if this whole thing were a car. Okay? And then think of loving people like the outside or the frame of the car. You can't go down the road without the engine. Right? We can't get anywhere without loving God. But also, if you only have an engine and nothing else, you're going to have a hard time riding in that car, sitting on an engine. It's impossible, right? And so if we love God, if we have the engine of loving God, but we don't actually have that within the frame of loving people, then we're not going to get anywhere. It's like we're a car with no frame. So these two things go together. They support each other. They're not the same, but they go together. Here's the point. If we don't love people, we don't truly love God. Think about that. If we don't love people, we don't love God. So I want to encourage you guys and challenge you guys to think about that. Does the way that you're treating other people reflect and show that you love God? Or does it not? Does the way that you're treating your siblings maybe during this time of quarantine show that you love God? Does the way that you're treating other people online and in social media reflect and show that you love God? These are questions that we need to ask ourselves, because truly, if we don't love people, we don't love God. And so back to the question that we began with, how does Jesus want His people to relate to each other? And I think from what we just read, it's pretty simple. Love. If we summed it up with one word, He wants us to love Him. He wants us to love others. And so related to that, we started with talking about what makes a good church. When I go to look for a church, what should I look for in a church? There's a lot of things that we need to look for, a lot of things we should be aware of when we're looking at churches. But the most important thing that we can look for is love. Do they genuinely love God? Do people genuinely love God and have a relationship with Him? And also, do they genuinely love each other? Do they genuinely love people? This is the most important thing that makes a church a good church. It's what made Stephanie's experience in youth group joyful and meaningful. And it ultimately is what helped her, as you saw in the video, partially what helped her come to the Lord and come to a relationship with Him. And it's the same thing that's going to make your experience in your church, in youth group, at the block, wherever you are, it's going to make your experience more meaningful and also more joyful if you commit yourself to this. So I encourage you to love others now. I want to challenge you to do something. I want you to send a message to somebody that goes to the block that you know, but that maybe you don't normally talk to. And you know of this person, but maybe they're in a different grade. Maybe you don't really talk to them on Wednesdays, but you've seen them at the block before. I want to challenge you, encourage you to send them a message. Ask them how they're doing. Ask them what's going on with them. Be genuinely concerned for them. Care for them. And show genuine love for them. I want to encourage you to do that. Because I want you to remember, how we love people is how we show that we love God. So, with that said, I want to encourage you guys also tonight to check out the Bible Project video, which is a very good video this week. It's about love, which we just talked about, but it really explains well the biblical concept of love. So check that out. It should be linked right below here. And then also don't forget to Zoom with us later on. We'll be playing a game tonight on Zoom. So make sure you check that out. There's more details to the right in the comments section. Miss you guys. Praying for you. Hope you're all doing well. We'll talk to you soon.